Tonight, two races that will shape law enforcement in Spokane County. Our first half hour features two Republicans vying for Spokane County Sheriff, incumbent Ozzie Knezovich and challenger Doug Orr. In our second debate, hear from two men seeking the open seat for Spokane County Prosecutor, Democrat Brian Beggs and Republican Larry Haskell, as KSPS presents this 2014 election special.
Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Christy Goranson, the moderator for tonight's debates. We begin with the race for Spokane County Sheriff, and because Washington is a top two primary state, both candidates in this race are Republicans. Let's meet them. Incumbent Ozzie Knezovich was appointed sheriff in the spring of 2006 and elected to the office of sheriff in the fall of 2006. Sheriff Knezovich is seeking his third term. Incumbent Doug Orr is a detective with the Spokane Police Department, where he's worked since 1996. Detective Orr previously worked for Idaho State Police. He holds a PhD in criminal justice from Washington State University. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Well, for this debate, the candidates will answer questions from a panel of Spokane journalists. From KREM 2 News, reporter Sean Chitness. From KXOY News 4, executive producer Melissa Luck. And from the Spokesman Review, government reporter Kip Hill. So before we begin, we want to go over a few of the debate rules for our viewers. All of these rules were agreed to by the candidates prior to the debate. The reporter panel will ask the same question to both candidates, or a panel member may direct a question to just one candidate. Reporter panel members may request a follow-up to an answer. Answers will be limited to 1 minute. Candidates will be allowed 2 rebuttals for the entire debate. Rebuttal length will be limited to 30 seconds. So let's begin. A coin flip determined that Sheriff Knezovich, you will have the opportunity to answer the first question first. And Sean, take it away.
Christy, thank you. Candidates, we want to begin by talking about school shootings and the recent one on the west side of the state last week. Talk to us about what you think the agency, the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, can do to be prepared for that type of incident, and how you can keep the community safe when it is concerned about something like that happening in our area.
School shootings are something that we've been looking at for a very long time. I was actually on the foundation team of the response for the Spokane County Sheriff's Office to school shootings. We actually teach a lot of the classes throughout the region on school shootings and how to respond to those shootings. So since 1994, I've been involved in this type of discussion because of my background in SWAT. One of the biggest things that we have to do is also train our schools, and Spokane County has been very effective in training our public schools in the things that they need to look at and how we go forward. The other aspect is to take a strong, hard look at our mental health system and try to identify kids that are having trouble before we have this type of incident happen.
All right, Detective Orr?
I don't think we can be fooled into thinking we're going to have an easy answer for this. In fact, we're not. Nobody saw this coming over on the west side of the state, a student being enrolled there. What is important is that we do have training involved. We do have training in place right now, but with both departments. And I think the core of it belongs to the crisis intervention training. What happens afterwards, how we respond to that. But most important right now, we have in place right now some labor negotiations with school resource officers, and for them to be better armed, better trained. Those labor negotiations have stalled, and it's important for us for everyone to partner with them to see that through and to get it in place now.
All right, second question, Melissa, and Detective Orr, you'll take this one first.
Candidates, 2 controversial gun rights initiatives on the ballot in Washington that both claim in their own way to make our state safer. 594 involves the expansion of background checks. 591 makes the state background checks line up with federal background checks. What are your stance on these initiatives, and do you think either of them would do anything to keep our community more safe?
591 is very straightforward. In fact, it more or less just reinforces our Second Amendment, that firearms are not going to be confiscated. With that, there shouldn't be any question that would be a yes for me. As far as 594, what it intends to do is to keep firearms from those who might hurt other people, and for those who couldn't get past a background check. In that way, you would say well, that's just great, but right now, that 18 pages, very ambiguous language, and it doesn't, those strategies do not reduce gun violence. And I think that's the most important thing here. $10 million has been spent on these campaigns. you know what I could do with $10 million? Crisis intervention training, where officers could interdict those guns, those weapons, the places where they matter the most. Domestic violence situations, situations with mental illness crisis. So that's where we need to focus.
Sheriff?
I support 591 because it does bring Washington in line with the federal standards, very clearly written legislation. I do not support 594 because it's 18 pages of very complicated language. It doesn't just say sell, it says transfer, and that word transfer is going to be a major problem in enforcing that law. You also have a lot of mandates, unfunded mandates that are being pushed down to the law enforcement agencies and small businesses. One of the things that we need to really address is when you take a look at trying to resolve these issues is who actually is applying for these weapons and how do we intervent them from getting those weapons. A simple background check of getting a concealed weapons permit would solve and close that loophole, because I'm very much in favor in closing the loophole simply for the domestic violence side of this.
Thank you. All right, Kip?
Thanks, Christy. Budget session's coming up for the county. I'm going to ask both candidates to make a pitch. Do we need additional deputies, and where do we need them, and where's the money going to come from if we do need them?
And Sheriff Knezovich, you'll answer this one first.
Since 2008, the unincorporated areas of Spokane County have lost 34 deputies due to the national economy, actually worldwide economy. We have been struggling to try to recoup those positions through different measures of streamlining the agency, saving money where we could save money. There just isn't any money in the county's pipeline to do that. You know, there was in the paper, my opponent mentioned that he would ask for 5 deputies a year. Well, it takes 7 years to accomplish getting those 34 positions back. So in 2022, you would have the same amount of officers that you had in 2008. We have to have a really strong discussion with the Board of County Commissioners about where do we prioritize revenues, and if we can't find any revenues, are there revenues that we can come forward with and take to the citizens to pass?
Okay. Detective Orr?
If someone tells me that there isn't any money, then I'm going to create it. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. First of all, I'd be scared of anybody who thinks that they can answer that question in 60 seconds. It just can't be done. But to add some perspective, we spend 70% of our budget now on criminal justice. And at some point, the taxpayers are going to say, you know, we give you 70% of our money to do this and get this done, and you're not getting it done. So if we don't have money, we create it. So I'm going to focus my attention on creating revenue streams that aren't there. I'll give you a good example. The police department in California recently created their own records management system, wrote their own computer code for that. They now sell that code to other agencies and bring in more than $1 million a year. So I'm going to bring in some of that human capital and create some of those revenue streams.
All right, next question, Sean.
Candidates, let's talk about the reputation of the Sheriff's Office. As you know, there have been some stories about specific deputies having misconduct while on duty. What can be done to improve the reputation when you have cases like that? And also, do more steps need to be taken involving the legislature to give the sheriff more authority to deal with those deputies? Detective
Orr, you'll take this one first.
First of all, morale in the Sheriff's Office is fairly low right now, and apathy is fairly high. That needs to be solved immediately. When we talk about legislation, I know my opponent has promoted the integrity legislation. My opponent has gone to Olympia twice. It never makes it out of committee, and I can't see banging my head against the wall over something that's not going to work. So let's go ahead and bring it here to Spokane. Let's create some civilian oversight. And I'm not talking about just using the word transparency. I want to make a system, an ombudsman system, that is answerable. So, you know, when deputies lose their humility, we know they've done something selfish. They forget who they're working with and who they're working for. An ombudsman system will fix that and create that transparency that we need.
Sheriff Knezovich?
My opponent talks about the integrity legislation. There's only one reason that the integrity legislation hasn't passed, and that's because of the lobbies that form against it. He's endorsed by the lobbies that fought the implementation of the legislation that simply said you shouldn't commit crimes on duty, nor should you lie. And it left it up to the arbitrator to determine if we had proven our point. There have been roughly 54 people within the sheriff's office that did not wear their badge with honor and were removed from service. Only 4 of those were returned by arbitrators. And if you read the arbitration decision, it wasn't because of anything that we did in those investigations. It was very arbitrary decisions. We need to find a system and pass a law that if an arbitrator agrees with us, then they have to stay with our findings. An ombudsman, I'm working towards that right now. I've presented that to the Board of County Commissioners, but an ombudsman is not for internal investigations. It is for the outside to look inside.
But can
I have a rebuttal.
Okay, go ahead, 30 seconds.
It was interesting what my opponent just said there, that he sent 54 on off the job and he's only been overturned 4 times. That's a little deceiving. My opponent, I wish, would talk about how many times he's gone to grievance and then how many times he's been overturned. And that would show you the record that he has. This is about following the law. This is about following the law. It's about due process and giving everyone, no matter if they're Joe repeat offender or if they're a Silver Star deputy, giving them due process.
Did you have a follow-up question?
I was just going to say to both of you candidates, what about the reflection on the leader of that agency, and how would you deal with that? Doesn't that require you to do something more, regardless of getting other agencies or organizations involved?
Sheriff?
We have a very strong reputation within the community. If you talk to the citizens out there, they know that one thing, the Spokane County Sheriff's Office is held to very high standards. They have seen me hold my agency to very high standards, and that is one of the things that they compliment me the most on, is the fact that I do hold people accountable. I do follow the law. There's not been one time that my opponent can point to where an arbitrator has said, Sheriff, you didn't follow the law. Nor has civil service ever said that.
All right, next question, Melissa. And Sheriff, you'll answer this one first. Oh,
All right,
you would like to use your rebuttal?
No, I'll save it.
Okay.
You talked about endorsement, Sheriff, and I think that leads nicely into our next question. The Deputies Union has endorsed your opponent. I want to talk to you, Detective Orr, about what do you think that means moving forward? And to Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich, do you feel like in some ways maybe, have you lost the room? And maybe this legislation and the push for that has had something to do with that?
Sheriff?
I have not lost the support of the rank and file. The union leadership is different than the rank and file. The rank and file is very upset about how their union leadership handled that endorsement. As a matter of fact, they have asked a couple of times for a new vote on that. The thing that you have to look at is the unions statewide were very angry with me when I went to Olympia to do this. Matter of fact, our first meeting in Representative Kevin Parker's office, they stated, Sheriff, you've made us very angry. If you don't back down, we're coming after you. And that's what they did. They recruited my opponent. They came after me in an election. But again, they misjudged the citizens of this county. The citizens of this county stand behind me because I do hold people accountable. That was evidenced by a 72% primary win.
Trust is the currency of leadership. If you don't have it, you're not going to get anything done. I went to, and it's not fair to demonize unions. I'm not going to demonize the labor, the middle class worker. I listened to them. And when I went to talk to them about what we needed to go forward with, the fact that they would somehow want to lie or commit crimes on duty is ludicrous. I told them, when they asked me that question during the endorsement interview, they said, what are your thoughts on civilian oversight? Now, if there's anything that you're not going to get the union endorsement over, it's that. I told them, we're going to go forward with this. We're going to have it in my 4 years. I'm going to lead you through it. It's going to be something that we can all accept, and it's not going to distract us from the good job we're going to do. And they still endorsed me. And that's a powerful statement, and I'm proud to be endorsed by them.
All right, next question, Kip, and Detective Orr, you'll answer this one first.
Yes, another money question. Do we need a new jail, and how are we going to pay for it?
I'm going to fight that tooth and nail. We don't need a new jail. We have before us a blueprint on how to go about not having a new jail. The idea that we can change people's thinkings, and change their thinking, and I'm talking about what's rooted in that cognitive behavioral therapy where we're actually rehabilitating a person's way of thinking that they're not going to come back into the system. That's not for everybody. There are people out there that want to hurt us. They need an orange jumpsuit, they need a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and they need to sit in jail. We can't fix them. For the ones that are amenable to treatment, we have a plan for that. You keep them from coming back, you draw down the jail population. Let's put it to work, let's give it some time, and I think in the end, you'll find out we don't need a new jail.
Sheriff Knezovich?
My opponent is very naive on this subject. For the last 8 years, and actually the last 18 years, this community has fought with this issue. In 1995, the Spokane County Jail was identified as being overcrowded at 577 inmates. This week we had 660 inmates in a facility designed for 464. This has never been about a new jail. It's been about replacing Geiger Corrections, which is a very antiquated military barracks converted to be a jail, never intended to be a jail. My opponent doesn't recognize the fact that Commissioner Mark Richard and I brought smart justice to this community in 2007 when we hired David Bennett. We implemented many of those things that David Bennett brought to the table. Many of those ideas in the blueprint for reform are my ideas, things that we brought into this community. We have lowered the jail population roughly 25%. You're not going to get to a position where you can just magically wave a wand. And the reason we have repeat offenders in this community is because of the jail.
Sheriff, would you support a tax to pay for the jail?
You're going to have to take this to the citizens, and that's one of the things that my opponent is deathly afraid of. He doesn't want to lead. He wants to tried and true no new tax tagline. When you're a leader, you have to be willing to step up and say, folks, here's where we're at, here's what we need to go forward, and here's what it's going to take. And that's going to be taking it to them for them to decide. It's not us raising their taxes. The citizen will decide.
Detective Orr, would you like to answer the follow-up question as well?
Yeah, when we talk about money, I didn't lead us into a $300,000 lawsuit over legal financial obligations. I didn't lead us into a lawsuit over $79,000 worth of an illegal search a couple months ago. More than $500,000 to employees for claims against wrongful terminations, $230,000 to Prison News for a First Amendment violation. My opponent fired a victim of sexual harassment, and that cost you $500,000. You change leadership, I'll give you the money.
You may use your first rebuttal.
First rebuttal. Mr. Orr totally mischaracterizes what happened here, and if you take a look at the record, my administration has been sued vastly less than the prior administration. The reason being, we totally changed the policies and procedures that we work under. We have saved the money, and that lawsuit that he talks about, the $500,000, was a sexual harassment lawsuit that we ended up inheriting from the prior administration. They didn't do anything about it, and we had to deal with it. And it did cost money. And that's what happens when you allow something to go on for 9 years, then try to fix it.
All right. Next question, Sean. And Sheriff Knezovich, you'll answer this one first.
Well, Sheriff, you did just bring up the issue of repeat offenders and the relationship to jail, but what about the court system in general? Candidates, what can be done, especially in your position as sheriff, to keep some of these criminals from coming back out just days after they were initially booked?
One of the things that you have to take a look at is how did we end up with repeat offenders? And that's because we're not holding them accountable. We're not holding them in jail when they need to be held in jail. They get booked. Within 3 days, they're out on the street. And you ask any deputy or officer out there, they get told that by the criminal element all the time. They'll be out in 3 days. You have to have a situation where you have accountability. In order for smart justice to work, in order for the blueprint for reform to work, you have to have one key thing, and that is an empty jail bed. To hold people accountable when they violate their programming, when we try to steer them out of that criminal path, if they choose to go back to that path, there has to be swift and certain justice on that. That is one of the things my opponent just does not understand about smart justice in the jail. You have to have that empty jail bed. If you don't, you're going to end up with repeat offenders because we arrest them. We know who they are. We actually track our crime rates when they're in and out of jail. We need to be able to keep them in jail, and they need to be held accountable.
Let me take off my police hat and put on my academic hat here for just a second. Good policy is built on empirical foundation. In other words, research. Number two, it's built on good training. And number three, it has an accountability measure of some sort. My opponent says I don't understand policy or research, and that I'm afraid to go forward. We have a good blueprint ahead of us. It includes a screening tool for the judges. Right now, we have to have someone that can enact policy and implement it. That person is me, through the Vancouver Project for patrol officers, identifying those repeat offenders, excising them from the county, and then also the burglary profile that I'm going to bring. Increasing clearance rates, 400%, tripling the potential for arrest. Those scientific, well-founded ideas that we can bring here to Spokane County.
All right, Sheriff, your second and
My
final
second
rebuttal.
final rebuttal. My opponent talks about this burglary aspect that he's going to bring to Spokane. The problem is it came from Daytona Beach. It was a PhD study. If you read that study, it clearly states that it is not vetted. It needs to be fully vetted. These arrest rates, correlation to 400%, haven't been vetted. And the chief of police said this, and here, this is a letter from him. Dr. Hunn's study and hypothesis are just a small component of his overall strategies. What he is trying to base his burglary aspect on is a 9-page PhD light study that was never vetted.
All right, Melissa, you have the next question.
I
And
have a rebuttal, please.
you may. Your second and final rebuttal.
That was co-authored. That study was co-authored by the chief of police of Daytona Beach, and it was co-authored by Dr. David Farrington, one of the top 3 criminologists in the world. Don't be afraid to bring that here. It's innovative. I'm going to make it work.
All right, and Detective Orr, you'll take this next question first. Melissa?
Those of us that live in Spokane County are lucky that most of us will never be the victim of violent crime. But property crime, it could be happening to us in the parking lot right now. There's been some recent high-profile cases where burglary rings busted up. But what would you do to increase this and make the people of Spokane feel like this is a priority? Because right now, whatever the numbers show, people in Spokane do not believe that this is a priority for either agency.
I've knocked on probably 10,000 doors during this campaign. And I'd say more than half of them that actually step out and talk to me each have their own property crime story. And we can talk about successes we've had in lowering the property crime rate here and there, but you talk to that person who gets victimized, property crime is up for them 100%. We do have partnerships available to us through COPS and through SCOPE. Some of those just need to be fine-tuned just a little bit, but those programs are there. And I'm going to expand those and probably consolidate them a little bit.
Sure.
My opponent talks about researched philosophies. We implemented one of the most researched philosophies in 2007, which is intelligence-led policing. That has aided us in identifying not only where and how crimes are being committed, but who's committing those crimes. We have this very robust, and that is why since 2007, we have reduced the violent crime rate in this county by 56%, lowest rate in 20 years. The property crimes rate is down 8% since 2004. We have targeted these issues, but it's not just because of intelligence-led policing as far as the policing aspect, it's the community-oriented part of intelligence-led policing. We have 550 SCOPE volunteers which we engage. We train them to go out and collect fingerprints, to look at email that our citizens send us saying where crime is. It's the citizen that is the greatest asset to us. We created a website where they could send it straight to us and we get their information.
All right, Sheriff Knezovich, you'll take this next question first. Kip?
Thanks, Christy. The lateral vascular neck restraint is a non-lethal method that deputies use to take down a subject who is presenting a risk to them. We know this. It's been used in several counties across the nation and has spawned some lawsuits. King County recently decided it was going to train deputies again to use this hold after a 10-year absence. It's used in Spokane County. Sheriff, do you think we need to take another look at this, and is it being used properly in the community?
With any training aspect and with any tool that you use, you always have to take a look at, are we applying this correctly? Are we training correctly? Those are all the questions that get asked every time that you have a use of force situation. We are currently researching the LVNR aspect. The state criminal justice has just re-implemented LVNR, the neck restraint, back into the curricula at the basic academy. They stand behind its safety. We are actually reading a study right now from Canada, because Canada has just given their blessing on the LVNR. So we always take a look at anything that has potential of life safety issues. But when you take a look at it, LVNR is being used throughout the state, and the country of Canada has just stated it's a very effective and safe tool.
When we talk about use of force, sometimes it's more about how it looks and how it sounds. If you use the word lateral neck restraint, people don't really know what you're talking about. You use the word chokehold and everyone knows what you're talking about. We train people in how to defend themselves, train officers how to defend themselves with nightsticks. Watching that on TV, an officer defend himself with a nightstick could be misinterpreted. The lateral neck restraint is a safe tool. Each tool, you'll find that when we use them, it'll increase officer injuries or it'll decrease officer injuries. It'll increase injuries to the suspect or decrease injuries to the suspect. More and better research, but the lateral neck restraint can be used safely by officers in the field.
All right, Detective Orr, you'll answer this next question first, and this is going to be our last question, so we'll limit your answer to 30 seconds. And Sean, this is yours.
Candidates, let's just talk about a couple things that Spokane Police has done. One, taking SWAT and rebranding it to Emergency Response Unit, and also using body cameras. Are those things you would like to see the Sheriff's Office do? Detective.
Yes, I believe already there's been a pilot program for the body cameras. That needs to be extended. We have to negotiate that with labor, of course, to have a full concept as it applies to civilian oversight so that we can use them in disciplinary measures. That has to happen right now. And again, creating that partnership with labor is very important. I don't demonize labor. I see them as an asset, not a liability. And that's where I'm going to start.
All right, Sheriff.
The answer is yes to both. You need body cameras, and we need to make sure that we are looking at all aspects of that particular system. We have done our trial. We are actually in negotiations with labor, and that started 2 years ago. We gave them just recently the new policy that we've come up with. We're waiting for them to come back. However, I truly believe that the cameras will reduce liability for this community.
All right, that will have to be the last question, so it's time now for closing statements. And before the debate, we flipped a coin, and Sheriff Knezovich, you will go first. You have 1 minute for closing statements.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to serve you as your sheriff for the last 8 years. We have done a lot of amazing things in that last 8 years. We have reduced violent crime by 56%, lowest violent crime rate in 20 years. Property crime rate is down. We have trained 18,000 law enforcement professionals from across the world because we are known as an international leader in training. My opponent talks about his endorsements all the time. Take a look at the website. You will see and compare the endorsements. I'm endorsed by law enforcement leaders from across the state. I'm endorsed by my own employees. There is a difference between the line troop and labor. My labor group has stated that I have too high of morals and that sex on duty is okay. I don't think that sex on duty is okay, and that is what's caused some of the rubs between me and labor, not me and the rank and file. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Sheriff Knezovich. Detective Orr, you have 1 minute for closing statements.
And thank you for having me here today, and thank you to Channel 7. I think the ground troops are saying the sheriff's standards are not high enough, that the law is the highest standard. The sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of the county, and it is ironic to me that the people that he says he's leading are the people endorsing me. And I'm proud to be endorsed by the Spokane County Deputy Sheriff's Association, but I'm also proud to be endorsed by the detention services, that's the jail, their nurses. I'm also endorsed by the Spokane Police Guild. I'm also endorsed by the Spokane Police Lieutenants and Captains Association. I'm endorsed by the Spokane Firefighters. I'm endorsed by the Washington Association of Chiefs of Police and Sheriffs, or WACOPS. I'm also endorsed by the Washington Council of Metropolitan Police and Sheriffs. Law enforcement is endorsing Doug Orr for sheriff. Now you trust these people with your lives. Trust them with your vote, and vote for me on Election Day. Thank you.
Thank you to you both, and that will do it for this debate. Our thanks to the candidates, Ozzie Knezovich and Doug Orr, who are running for Spokane County Sheriff. Up next, candidates running for Spokane County Prosecutor. We'll be right back.